Hello, welcome to QTV's The Week in Review, where we take a closer look at 10 of the top stories making the headlines. I am Mahmoud Mbouch. As always, we'll go beyond the headlines and bring you depth, analysis, insight, and deeper thoughts on some of these stories. This week, we begin with the devastating fire that engulfed Sandika Market in Serekunda, which left vendors reeling and raised urgent questions about safety, especially at markets. President Barrow's Eid message emphasized peace and prosperity and unity. And Kalifing Municipal Council, KMC, addressed the concerns over these recent fires and many more stories to come. Now, our first story. An outbreak in Serekunda. We've been reporting outbreaks of fire recently, in recent years, fairly regularly. This time, it was at the famous Sandika in Serekunda. Let's just take a look at this clip.
Burnt grains, fruits, and other food items lay scattered among the charred remnants of what used to be bustling stalls. Musa Kamara from Somita village was enjoying the Eid festivities with his family in Fonyi when he received the devastating news that his store was on fire. Standing helplessly at the site where his stall once stood, Musa shared his heartbreak, having lost several bags of groundnuts, gari, and koos in the blaze. Fatou Jane, a well-known vendor from Bundung Bohol, is equally devastated. She relied on the income from selling fruits to support her family, and now, with nothing left, she faces an uncertain future.
Mr. Jata, we've heard from two victims, really, who face ruin because of this fire, and also when we factor in the fact most of these commercial vendors never really take insurance, do they? So now they'll have to rely on philanthropy and perhaps governments and councils, whatever they can do. Quite an extraordinary incident there, and the scale of the damage as well.
Indeed, it is devastating and quite alarming for the country because it's the latest fire incident the country has witnessed, like in across markets in the country. And I think this is not the only such incidents taking place. So I think it's quite there's a need to take action. Take strong actions to make sure that these fires incidents are avoided to some extent. Because when you go to the market, there are significant signs that shows that when the market experiences fire incidents, it's going to be very devastating. The ventilation, the lack of maintenance and proper inspection. So there are a lot of things involved. And like you said, the issue of insurance, most of these vendors are not insured, and most likely they will rely on the support of donors. Like yesterday we've witnessed Q Group Foundation offered a donation of $200,000, which was quite remarkable and commendable from their side because it was well received by the vendors, and they really expressed gratitude, and they also revealed that it meant a lot for them, though it may not solve their problems all, but it will help them to rebuild and recover from the damages of the incident.
Of course, but of course Q Group, it's got a philanthropic arm which sort of integrates, as it were, helping into the corporate idea, philosophy, identity, as it were, then it's easier to help, isn't it? So, but President Barrow also, when he came from Senegal, he went straight there.
Sure.
We also reported.
That was another chapter as well. The president visited the market, but he equally started with the Brikama market, which was another a former victim of fire incidents. In fact, it's almost the same narrative. Every year they experience fire outbreaks in the market. So the president equally as well visited the Serekunda Sandika market, where he toured the area, and equally as well the names of the victims were recorded by the National Disaster Management Agency, and with promises that they would take action towards making sure that most of the victims will receive help.
You see, but this is the key. This is coming after the event. let's go to the causes now. All of these years, each time you would hear people talk about electrical fault, and often, you know, you wonder, based on what? Have they done any investigations? And then you would expect the fire and rescue services to do the investigation so that we know, but we really do not know. In our report, we said that we still do not know the cause of it, which is really important now, given the frequency of these incidents sort of over the years. Isn't it time to see whether there's a pattern running through them so you know what to address?
Yeah, to connect the dots.
It appears that we haven't, because we are talking about another fire incident.
Indeed, there is a need to learn from the fire incidents, you know, throughout the country, I would say, not only Serekunda market, but likewise at the Brikama market and other notable markets. Like you said, there is a need to connect the dots, you know. These fire outbreaks have been happening for quite a long time now, and the topic of like electrical challenges or such to some extent, you know. And one may argue that it might be a cause, because like you look at the market, you know, how many people have meters, you know, people just connect, you have different connections, you know, and, you know, do they even have the right materials, like the right breakers, and, you know, the earth materials to withstand? That might be an argument to some extent.
I understand that, but this is a situation where we don't need to conjecture. That might be an argument, granted, but what were the facts? It is important for an investigation to be done by people with expertise, the right expertise, so we can identify the facts of the situation. That's what you can use to protect yourself for the future, isn't it?
The council, that is very quite significant. I think the council has already responded to that like they will set up a task force that will consist now like the SIS, the Gambia Police Force, and, you know, to sit and review, like to know really is what is causing this, and that would also involve the reviewing of the wiring systems in the market to know whether it is really the fault of NAWEC or it is caused by electrical, you know, sucks also. So which is quite important. I think it should be the right step to be taken before anything could start.
But this is very interesting, because NAWEC, of course, issued a public statement. They issued two. First, they said that they had initial assessment of their structures in place. They didn't show any fault, so it wasn't really their fault. And then afterwards, they came with another statement saying that actually they were not providing any services for this locality. You know, that was what it said, which made some of us think, so what systems were you talking about that they were in place?
So I think it will also be important, like, to also shift the narrative away from NAWEC. It's a fire outbreak. It could be caused by anything, you know. No one knows. It could be a spark from a brigade or, you know.
So that's it. But that is, you're absolutely correct. That's precisely it. The focus must not be on NAWEC, not without evidence. One shouldn't automatically think that they're at fault. But this is where you need an independent, honest investigation. So all parties, the stakeholders, all involved, we will see how we can improve the system, isn't it? That sort of thing, the independent thinking. But when we thought about this, I think afterwards we will come to the mayor, Talib, talking about it. These locations, and then the roads leading to them, so narrow. So in the event of an emergency like that, it's difficult for the fire and rescue services to come to access the place. Extraordinary. Why don't we factor stuff like that into our planning, as it were? It's quite extraordinary.
I think things like that have already been factored. It now boils to the issue of implementation, making sure that people respect the right demarcations. Because if you enter inside the market, there are pavements, but all of these pavements have already like been occupied by vendors, you know. And you would quite agree with me of like to recall that there is this operation, you know, clear the roads, you know, which is happening.
Do you know what? Just suspend the thought there. We'll come back to this in a slightly different context, but it will still be relevant. Now we go to our next story here. Our president, of course, during the week we marked Eid, so often we get a message, the president's Eid message. Let's just listen to this one.
Let us all work for the Gambia. If we stand firm and work together, within 5 or 10 years, the Gambia will be envied globally.
While acknowledging gaps in his development agenda, the Gambian leader expressed pride in the progress made so far.
I may not have been able to achieve all my wishes for the country, but the little I have been able to do is widely praised and appreciated by our development partners. There are countries that come to the Gambia to conduct studies on our success.
Yes, Mr. Jatta, that was our president in his Eid message. What did you make of it, particularly the tone of it and the subject matter, the topics you decided to talk on? Did you think that was appropriate for an Eid message?
Indeed, one may argue that it could be the right angle to look at, as far as the country is important. Because what Barrow has just said is like the country is the most important thing. He does not matter, and to some extent he said there can only be one president, and when his time comes to an end, he will obviously step down. And he talks about the need for unity, which is very important in every country. And if you are very vigilant, you could tell that unity is a major problem affecting most African countries.
Absolutely, that's very true. But again, when the president really felt the need to say that there can only be one president, I mean, everybody knows that, then you begin to wonder, what was behind that statement? That's the only way to look.
Sure.
Because what he said, everybody knows that there can only be
it's no more news to some extent.
That's it. Yeah. So nothing that anybody can do about it. Then it makes you wonder, what do you think he was addressing there?
I think he was addressing to some extent, like he wanted people to understand that there is a need to take ownership, to be of their country, to be responsible citizens, to have love for their country to some extent, because there are a lot of things happening to some extent, like he did mention, he mentioned that some government officials will tell you, I will not work with this man, but he also said that they are not working for him, they are working for the country, which is the fact actually, because the government is the people. That is what the 16th president of America said. That is how he defined democracy. He defined it as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So that is very crucial. So, but it's important as well as a country, so that there is a need to be for us to have a punishment, for us to have implementation. When people do things that are wrong, let them be punished to some extent. Let them introduce mechanisms where they could let them not only stop at commissions, introducing such commissions, but let them also go towards execution. That way around, we would work towards having a very good country to some extent.
That's it. But this is the key, though, isn't it? When people say that I'm not going to work for that man, many governments, well, we call it government jobs, they are really state jobs.
State jobs,
You see, we have to make a distinction here, don't we, between the state and the government. As they say, governments come and go. Yeah. But the state sort of remains, and as a civil servant, which is a key part of government, you actually have to be neutral. In theory, anyway, that's what you need to do. But quite fascinating there, because it generated, I mean, the Eid message, it generated so much talk, didn't it? A lot of people sort of were really making critical remarks, as it were, about it. What did you make of that kind of reaction?
I think it's important to some extent, for it to be highlighted, considering the state at which the country is, it's important to talk about it. But one may also argue that the president could have gone, could have looked at other angles and so forth. But it's important that he highlighted some of those things, at least because it's a festive period, and most people, it's considered as a public holiday. So listening to the president saying such things, it would help a lot of people to, come back, to their right senses, to have that sense of love for the country. Because, you compare us to other countries, the love of our country, is important, Though one may say that like there is no perfect country, but there is a need to put the Gambia first. It's very important. And like he said, if we come together as a country within 5 years, we will see results to some extent,
Yeah, absolutely. Good point at which to end that story. Next, KMC, that's it, held a press conference to address the fire, the Sandika fire, and the previous one at Latrikunda Market. Let's just take a look and listen.
The Sandika, especially in Serakunda, which is a council property, cannot continue to be where it is. The area is congested, it is by a hospital, the access routes are very thin, and we know there are large trucks coming all the way from Guinea-Conakry trying to access the Sandika.
That's it. Earlier on, when we talked about the Sandika story, we were talking about location, causes of these fires, whether all these fires that have been taking place, that have been occurring recently, in recent years, whether there's been any pattern, as it were, but that will only come after an investigation, isn't it, to determine what really caused it. But this is one of the reasons, perhaps. Location, which, where it was. Apparently it was just so densely located area, the hospital nearby. So any emergency, and emergencies tend to occur once in a while. Any situations like that could be devastating. Can you imagine, for instance, if it had entered the hospital? You know what I mean? Thank God that it didn't, but it could have done. So the location matters, as the mayor said there.
The entire location within the market, the Sandika, the hospital, it's like a ticking time bomb. It's a very critical situation. And it's sad, like you said, like to some extent, like we don't look at these issues when life is normal. But the moment there are incidents, that is when people react to them. But there is a need to look into the situation. One may talk about, one may say, you don't know the cause of the fire to some extent, or you may blame it on electrical issues. But even if there is a fire incident, looking at this situation, looking at the atmosphere, it will be very difficult, to respond to the fire outbreak. So I think what the mayor said is very visible, is very evident, and there is a need. It's very timely that they take advantage of this situation. They find a right location where they could decongest the market. In doing so, it will really help, in tackling future crises.
In fact, the mayor there said that actually they need to relocate.
Indeed.
Really.
There is a need for it.
It's not a good location right now.
The thing is, there are locations, but most people prefer, they're used to the market and they feel like, there's a need. But with time, people will adapt.
That's it, and we understand that previously they had wanted to move them, but the people really were sort of recalcitrant to that kind of change. So, but this is the key, the enforcement. State institutions must really learn to enforce, then people will adapt, isn't it?
Yeah.
But without that enforcement,
that is
adaptation will be much, much slower.
That is very important. The government has to come into full play in this, because, people...
And council, it's all authorities.
Yeah, it's a teamwork. It's a teamwork. That is why he said they will create a task force that will comprise the Gambia Police Force, the NDMA, and so forth, to look into. It's not only going to be around the electrical faults, but generally, looking at the market, situation. There is a need to look into the situation. But I think the media has to also conduct more follow-ups to know whether some of these things will be practicalized. Because the moment it is normalized, the situation comes to life again, and everybody will just forget about it. I think there's a need to conduct more follow-ups so that this matter could be avoided in the future to some extent.
Exactly. I think you've just given yourself the next assignment. Thank you very much, Mr. Yatta. Now to our next story. During the week, the MOHAS, the Ministry of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology, held a validation forum for the 2024 TVET Graduate Tracer Study. Let's just listen, take a look at this clip and listen.
This initiative exemplifies our steadfast commitment to fostering an educational paradigm that is both responsive and transformative, with the intention to build resilience, inclusion, skills, and equity in the Gambia education and social protection sectors. The findings of this study will serve as an indispensable repository of knowledge, shaping the discourse of TVET effectiveness and providing a nuanced understanding of its impact on economic development.
That was Ndai Antatal, the project coordinator at the Ministry of Finance, Central Project Coordinating Unit, as it were. So that is it. They want a responsive and transformative, as it were, to that, really, responsive to market needs and the like. So the tracer study, you see, I was in Tibet before, and it is absolutely important that you know the effect of whatever you are doing.
Sure.
How is it playing out in the market? Fantastic idea.
It's quite important, and I think it is yielding results in the country. Over the past years, one could say the government has, worked with partners, towards making sure that they enhance, TVET in schools and within institutions. And this is very visible everywhere. And there is a need, to conduct such studies. Really, there is a need to conduct such studies, because I know of people, who were not involved in TVET. Now they are involved, they are into business, and they're booming. So conducting such studies would help them to understand, the market dynamics and so forth, because most people are being employed now. They're getting aware of the need for TVET. So, conducting these studies would also help them to understand the dynamics, the growth, and, what other new, mechanisms they can put in place to make sure that they enhance. Because I just spoke with someone the last time. I was like, students are no more in focus, or the habit of reading is dying, and there is a need for the government to take up new initiatives to make sure that, they could counter this, and move students or push students into things that are more viable to some extent, like the ones that are not interested. So I think it is very important that they conduct such studies and come up with new strategies, that could help, the development of future policies, around TVET and so forth, like what other countries are doing, Nigeria, Ghana, and so forth. They are really thriving when it comes to TVET, and I think we are on the same track, and if such initiatives are intensified, trust me, the country may see more results from it.
Absolutely, and even the institutes, these TVET institutes can also refine their teaching methods.
Indeed.
And even the curriculum, what do I teach? Because when I was at TVET, I was the head of an institute, QIT for a while. So we used to talk to employers. So this has to do with employment outcomes. Used to talk to employers, and then they would complain about attitude. Then you, as a training institute, then you have to think about how do we incorporate that? How do we have a module that addresses this idea of attitude? So even training institutes themselves also have to learn and how to train these people to tackle some of these problems.
It's quite important, because discipline is number one in everything you do. If there is no discipline, it's going to be very difficult for you to thrive. Like even in the media space, you have got ethics. If you don't abide by those ethics, trust me, your work is going to be jeopardized. Your credibility is zero. So it's very important, and it's quite important that, like most of the TVET institutions now, they're introducing entrepreneurship as a subject, which is very important. Because TVET goes with entrepreneurship. TVET is business, and business is TVET to some extent, because eventually you would work with people. So that interaction, that is a need. Like that is where the discipline comes in place and so forth. So I think it's important that such initiatives are commended and are encouraged in the country to make sure that the issue of TVET is moved to the next level.
Absolutely, and very fascinating there, very interesting, good point that you've talked about entrepreneurship.
Sure.
And all the studies indicate that for entrepreneurial success, attitude actually is the biggest factor. You may have the highest IQ, but if you have the wrong attitude, you are not going to make it. Thank you very much there, Mr. Jatta. Now to our next story. During the week, the Minister of Trade, Employment and Regional Integration, Babakar Oljuf, stood before the lawmakers in the National Assembly and essentially unveiled his Lumos strategy. Let's just listen.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry, Regional Integration and Employment has finalized the National Domestic Strategy. The main objective of this strategy is to chart a path for enhancing trade in locally produced goods within the domestic market. Lumos play a critical role in achieving this objective. Therefore, as part of the implementation of the strategy, the Ministry is embarking on Lumo Market Modernization Program. A readiness assessment under this program has been conducted for 27 Lumo markets across the country. To pilot this program, the Ministry is collaborating with the ECOWAS Commission through the cross-border project and has support to refurbish the modernization of Wellingaraba Lumo market in LRR.
Quite interesting there. The Lumo, this sort of traditional, they sort of seem like they've been here for forever. This sort of local commercial activities, commercial hubs, as it were. It's like a selected day, isn't it? Or days or weeks, whatever, where you have the whole community. You even have people traveling from other communities to come and for their commercial activities, don't they? But why is it that now it appears to be in trouble to the extent that maybe we've not been helping it grow? It could have moved on to something else. We just let it sort of go around in circles until suddenly we find that we have to do something to regenerate it.
Not only regenerate it, but also like modernize it to some extent, because time has traveled and there is a need for society to level up with the latest trends to some extent. I think it's quite an important initiative taken by government with partners like the ECOWAS Commission. So it's very important, because if you look at the importance of modernizing Lumos, it's very crucial, because most people will come from different places and gather, so there is a need to have enough like good structures in place where people can sit and in the right environment and sell their goods. Because some of these goods you have to also look at like their exposure, the places where they are laid, they are going to be consumed by people, let's say like food products, so there is a need to have such structures in place, and this would promote more effective trade. People will sell freely, without much hindrance.
So that's only for the organizers, people who organize these things.
Yes, and the security-wise and so forth. So it's important if you have those structures in place, because they attack it in almost 27 local lumos across the country. So having those structures in place would help a lot, and it will also promote development, within the rural communities. People will come together. And you will notice that like now in most parts of the rural area, there is this government project, the Rural Electricity Modernization. They are virtually giving electricity to people for free. So with these Lumos, it will help to promote development, to promote more employment. People will, the rural urban drift, it will stop to some extent, because you may even have people in the urban areas coming with their products, because we are talking about locally produced products, how to enhance them in the country. Because we have got exports, but within the country as well, we can trade among ourselves, and I think this is going so well, and it's quite an important project, and they have already started with one Lumo, which is more of like the pilot project, and they have seen much success from that, and they're working with partners like Gumworks to develop more plans for the 27 Lumos.
Absolutely. As you were talking there, a thought just sort of occurred to me, that is it that people are really losing the appetite, the habit for Lumos? But that's a question for a different day. Thank you very much there, Mr. Jata. So that was our fifth story. So we'll take a short break. When we come back, 5 more to go.
QMoney is back again with its easy-to-use, secure and convenient mobile app that allows you to carry out all your transactions. No matter where you are or what time it is, you can always access your funds. With the new QMoney app, you can cash in and out, buy credit, buy QPower, shop, make payments, and so much more. You can also send QMoney, pay bills, receive international remittances, and transfer cash to others. Just download the app from your Play Store or App Store and get started. For more information, call customer care on 133. Q Money, Sinu Calpe. We innovate, others follow.
Welcome to the Weekend Review. We've already done 5 stories, but we have 5 more to go. And today I have my colleague, Mr. Usman Jatta, in the studio, and Mr. Ibrahim Cham, our sign language interpreter, to help me digest, as it were, the top stories of the week on the review. So now to the next one. Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education is set to incorporate local languages into the curriculum. Here, let's just take a look and listen.
Number one objective of the policy is to mitigate the learning loss that we are experiencing at foundational level. At foundational level, we mean from ECD to grade 3, children are coming from background where English is not spoken to them. Right now we have 7 languages in the policy, and that is Mandinka, Pular, Wolof, Saragule, Jola, Serer, and Manjak.
That was Mamadou Jeng, the Director of Curriculum at MOPSE, the learning loss, as it were, as he just said there. So quite an interesting experiment, isn't it? In education, you know, the idea has existed really for a very, very long time.
Indeed.
But now it seems as if we are set for a kind of nationwide rollout.
Sure. We are set for a nationwide rollout, but with much resources as well, like to make sure, to guarantee its success. You know, it's quite an important initiative that we take hold of our national languages. You know, like in other countries, for people, you know, like in Senegal per se, like you will see someone who can write write and spell in Wolof. You know, you read in Wolof. You know, so you'll be surprised actually. So it's important because it helps like to nurture that self-love for one's country and equally as well to make sure that, you know, you value your cultural heritage is very, very, very important to some extent. It's very, very important, but the implementation becomes the question to some extent.
That is very true, and this is the key. You're talking there about valuing one's culture and heritage and the like, but here, what Mamadou Jeng, here the other part is the learning. Cognitively, something it helps cognitive development, as it were, much better if you start your early education, as you call it, their early learning, till around grade 3 or something. Absolutely crucial that you begin with your own language, and then when you're introduced to the English language, you do much better. And cognitively, your learning capacity is sharpened much better than otherwise. Quite fascinating studies there.
It's important.
People,
it's important. It's more of like a brainstorming and trying to get prepared for what lies ahead to some extent. And I think the age group they are targeting as well is good. Like from the ECD, that's in the nursery schools going to from primary 1 to primary 3 is important because like there is this thing like catch them young, you know. So it's important at that stage. Kids easily learn and so forth. You know, I think it's quite important and it would really help. It would really help in terms of, you know, like making sure that they're prepared for what lies ahead.
So that's it. So now implementation, and that means you're going to have as well qualified teachers who are trained in how to impact, as it were, in the local languages and on all the rest of it. Of course, a lot of work to be done. Thank you very much there. Now we go to our next story. Well, climate change, disaster management. These days, well, in the past few years, we've been experiencing extreme weathers. So the Gambia, during the week, they held a 2-day stakeholder workshop on climate risk. Let's just take a look and listen.
Set out to provide the tools and the capacities and the capabilities for governments to make informed decisions with the support of stakeholders in the country. And we really strongly believe that this is very possible, and in the Gambia it exists, the foundations exist to make this a very successful program.
The workshop therefore represents a significant step towards translating our shared vision into actionable strategies within the GRMA framework, where empirical data will inform our local adaptation efforts.
We heard there Dr. Simon Wild from the Global Risk Modeling Alliance, and Boubacar Zaidi Jallo, the DPS, Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Listening to Dr. Wild there saying that in the Gambia the foundations seem all right for what we need to implement, but I added this because with us we have to be very interested in climate change and the effects. We've been suffering the flooding, the winds, windstorms, as it were, the deforestation and the coastal erosion. So we know what are our vulnerabilities, stuff that we need to address. So it is extremely important that we have these structures, we have the training and structures in place to deal with that. For God's sake, some studies tell us that Banjul is at risk. I don't know, maybe in 50, 60 years, Banjul would be swamped. We have a stake in this, a high one.
I think it's quite crucial, and the country should be on high alert with regards to climate change. For now, I think we have seen enough signs that climate change is real, like from the rainy seasons, like the flooding, the storms, like you mentioned. They are very, very important signs. It's like a survey itself, presenting itself free for you. So it's important that we know, how to respond to some of these disasters, and equally as well, what could be done to make sure that we mitigate future disasters to some extent. Because as a country, I think, in most areas, when you look at the issue of flooding, I think we have got solutions for it. And the solution would be, one may argue, one of the solutions would be having proper drainages in some areas, because there are some areas that are flood-prone areas. You cannot, whenever it rains, it's always flooded. So what could be done to mitigate that? There is a need, and developing such strategies and coming together, calling policymakers, I think it would help a lot.
Absolutely, and it's much more than that, isn't it? These are sort of multi-dimensional issues out there. For instance, even where we build our houses.
Indeed.
See, there are certain areas, maybe there should be more planning. So there are many dimensions, many aspects, as it were, to the problem. But this is it, and we've talked about really when it comes to implementation, we are not very, very, very efficient. Let's put it that way. Not very efficient at implementation. But this is it, the cost of failure. When you fail to put in the right structures and prepare yourself, people will suffer for it.
Indeed.
This is what we face now, isn't it? This is really the problem, the cost of failure, isn't it?
That is why we have to take it very seriously, actually, because, climate change does not have friends. When it comes, it hits hard, and that's it. So it's important to take urgent action. Now is the time to make sure that, we put our country in order, to avoid any future, disasters to some extent.
Well, to be able to respond to them, and what we can do to prevent, we do.
Indeed.
And then sometimes they will happen. How do you respond?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Now we go to our next story, zebra crossings. One would have thought that, well, people of my generation would have thought that, it's well understood. Everybody understood what it meant, what it means to have these lines on the road. Well, apparently not. Let's just take a look and listen.
Zebra crossings are often used in busy areas to enhance pedestrian safety and improve traffic flow, as they clearly indicate where people should cross and where vehicles should yield. In the Gambia, however, there have been a noticeable trend of neglect regarding zebra crossings, both by pedestrians and drivers.
That's it, both by pedestrians and drivers. God, we apply the route all the time, this highway, Bertel Harding Highway. And sometimes I felt sorry for these pedestrians. They will stand on the edge waiting for vehicles to stop.
Sure.
And they'll be there for a long time. Nobody would, so you'll be scared to go.
Yeah.
So that culture of just automatically learning to stop, we're having to learn it, isn't it? When we were younger, we used to have a few zebra crossings in Banjul, so we knew about it, but it appears that afterwards we lost it. We lost that knowledge, so now we are rediscovering it.
So for me, I don't think it's a question of knowing what zebra crossings are. It's a question of discipline. Like
yes, that habit of...
Yes, really,
you know,
really.
yes.
Because like you said, if you are driving a car or you're driving a vehicle to some extent, you know, if you see people along the way, you know, you should be the one to have that right mindset to say, let me stop and allow them to move.
Actually,
to some
as
extent.
As you approach it, you should slow down, one, and you can see before you whether you may need to stop. There's a pedestrian standing there wanting to cross. So, but we don't do that. Sometimes you see the pedestrian crossings. We've been in taxis, and the driver will be so impatient, as if saying to the person crossing, oh, why do you have to waste my time? It's extraordinary, the impatience.
You know, at times, you don't even have to wait. You don't have to see people at a zebra crossing for you to wait.
You must slow down anyway.
But the moment you see the zebra crossing, you know, anything could happen. Someone could just come and cross like that because it's a zebra crossing. That may happen.
But that's it.
Yes.
People must not do that either.
So,
just as our report, we said both the driver and the pedestrians themselves must also understand what they can do. It takes two.
Yeah.
It takes two to tango.
So that is why, you know, in our country, you notice that like the pedestrians in most cases, you know, there is a lot of accidents, you know, involving them, you know. So I was just speaking to one of my colleagues, and he was like, he's going to stop riding bicycles, you know, like along the highway because drivers don't respect them to some extent. So, you know, it boils down to the issue of discipline on both sides to some extent, you know. So, but there is a need, like, for people to loosen their hands. Like the guy would say, the roads are not tight, the hearts are tight to some extent. So if you see zebra crossings, you should know that, you know, this is a sign for me to slow down, you know, mentally. So it's important. And you would always question the issue of how they get their license, you know, because if you call yourself a professional driver, some of these things, you know, you should be able to avoid them to some extent.
That's it. And you've got the sound bite for this particular story. Now that we've widened the roads, let's widen the hearts. Thank you very much, Mr. Yatta. Now to our next story. During the week, Senegal marked its 65th independence anniversary. Let's just take a look at this clip.
Among the invited guests at the celebration were President Adama Barrow of the Gambia, Umar Sissoco Embalo of Guinea-Bissau, and Nigeria's Vice President Kassim Shettima, who joined President Bassirou Diomaye Faye and the people of Senegal. Analysts say their presence underscored the importance of unity and cooperation in West Africa, especially at a time when the region continues to face political and security challenges.
Yes, Senegal, our president was there. Yes, of course, our closest neighbor. We are almost sort of engulfed by them, really, except for that smiling mouth, where the smiling coast,
Atlantic Ocean,
except for that one. So, yes, what was your impression? What were your thoughts? Yes, Senegal's 65th anniversary. Then what? What were your thoughts?
When I saw like the celebration, I felt like there was a need for them to commemorate their 65th independence, because, you know, Senegal has gone a long way in terms of development, you know, infrastructure-wise, education-wise, in the transport system. A lot has been introduced, and equally as well, you know, to learn from like challenges that the country has witnessed in over the years, you know, to some extent, you know, politically and in terms of making sure that like they fight corruption, like, which is a key agenda of the current government of President Diomaye Faye to some extent, you know, making sure that they fight corruption and also improved economic viability in the country to some extent.
Yes, it seemed with me, my first question, my first view, my first impression was this. How many presidents have they had since 1960?
Indeed.
Senghor, Abdou Diouf, Abdoulaye Wade, Macky Sall, now we've got Diomaye Faye. And they've never had a coup. You know, these were the sort of flagship as it were, treasures of the Senegalese state. And that was quite interesting. And now the respect, the command in the region, and the relationship we've had with them, sometimes bittersweet. It's a kind of bittersweet, but that's like sibling rivalry. We are family in many ways. So, but these occasional spats we have, we've been handling them quite well, and they, as a country, not a bad country for us, sort of perhaps to regard as a big brother and emulate what we can. It's been quite extraordinary journey in spite of the problems they faced.
Indeed. For Senegal, one thing that keeps them going or keeps them together is that unity and love for the country. They would always complain to some extent on their various media outlets. But when it comes to the love for the country, they're always number one. Everybody will tell you, I'm from Dakar, I am Senegalese, you know. So there is that love, and that keeps them going. And that is very, very important for the development of any nation. Despite the challenges they face, you know, they see Senegal as, you know, one, you know, people, one country, one nation. That is very important, you know. And that is one of the biggest lessons one could learn from their country. So you're talking about the issue of coups and so forth, you know, but, you know, like I would always say, there is no perfect country, and eventually there will always be a dark chapter in your story to some extent.
That's it, but this is the key. It doesn't have to be. You know what I mean? Possibilities will always exist with anything. With anything, possibilities are always open. But again, what cannot be fatalistic about these things? There's nothing inevitable. This is what historians tell us. There's really nothing inevitable when it comes to the future, that inevitably it will happen. So this could be quite interesting. I understand your point, but it doesn't have to be.
Amidst all of this, they have got a good foundation, you know. You know, all of their presidents, you know, did great, like from Senghor to Ablaye Wade, you know, and now with Diomaye, they are enjoying because all of the foundation has been laid. You know, it's a matter of just working on their structures.
Absolutely. I have a feeling that a good number of Senegalese will tell you that, no, not all of them did great, but that's none of our business. But here with Diomaye Faye, there's a new era. It appears that, well, I've described it as a kind of democratic revolution that we are seeing in Senegal. You know, I'm not sure whether the two terms sit easily together, a democratic revolution, but it appears that was going on. They were voted into office, but they came with a kind of radical agenda. Quite interesting.
Quite interesting for sure, actually. And I think that is important to some extent, because what they are doing is to make sure that, like, every citizen enjoys, every citizen have a fair share of the cake, the national cake to some extent, because if you allow the country to run like that, if you allow the country to be controlled by a few individuals, eventually the proletarians would suffer, and the bourgeoisies, the upper class, will continue to enjoy it to some extent. So
thank you very much. I feel uneasy. I find it unsettling. When we use metaphors like sharing in the national cake. The last person that used it in this country, well, now we all know what he went on to do. Now to our next story, our final story. Well, an inventor in the army, quite fascinating. And earlier on, we were talking about frequent fires. Let's just take a look at this clip and listen.
This idea came in my mind when I was in Kafuta village. After from there, I started thinking how to invent it and start buying some materials, and also start ordering material from China also, like the remote control and the receiver and the cyber motor. From there, I started going inside the market, start buying certain material, like the electric motor.
Despite the promising potential of the project, Ndongo faced numerous challenges, primarily financial.
The start is very difficult. You have to change materials and bring another material, but now I know the right material to use for this robot now.
That was Captain Alhaji Ndongo. I'm the inventor of a firefighting robot. Yes, why not? Inventors can come from any background, can't they? And quite curious there, quite interesting there, that he's decided to put his talents to inventing this firefighting robot. You covered the story, didn't you?
Indeed,
yes.
I did.
So tell us more about it.
And I think it means the army has a lot to play. You know, the army can go beyond the normal duties. You know, it's the last resort to some extent. So that is why it's important that the army to some extent is empowered, because we're talking about the issue of fire outbreaks in the country. The army could play a significant role towards responding to most of these fire incidents. Though we have got a special service that is responsible for fire issues, but the army as a whole should also have a special unit responsible for responding to fires. And with this invention, I think it's quite extraordinary. And if once implemented, once the full design is practicalized, it will help a lot, because we are talking about the issue of accessibility, you know, in certain areas which are affected by fire incidents, like in the market. So if you have such a thing like this, you don't need to expose people to vulnerability to some extent, but it's more of like an automated system.
That's it. Automated system, absolutely, but two things there. The fact that the army this or the army that, I'm not sure whether the inventiveness has got much to do with whether he's a soldier or not. Perhaps if he had been in another profession, this person called Alaji Ndongo would have invented the same.
Indeed.
So this is about really Captain Alaji Ndongo.
Sure.
Let's be honest with that. This wasn't an army project. It was his individual project.
Indeed.
Fantastic. But we have to be realistic as well. How commercially viable is it? And when I look at the robot, it's so small. And then I looked at the fire, you could see the massive flames, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So let's be realistic, and then you ask, yes, as I said earlier, how commercially viable is it? With these big ones, what can it do? So we adjust our expectations. Maybe there are certain contexts with smaller fires where something like that could be used.
Yes, but with his invention, it's more of like an example, it's an example per se to some extent. Like, it is not the original practical version of the robot. This could be further developed, you know, with the help of partners, because you have to understand that it's a resource, it involves a lot of cost. He mentioned that he spent around $20,000 to develop just this mini robot to some extent. So imagine developing a huge one. It would require the intervention of partners to some extent. So I think it's crucial, like you said, you know, it's not only about, you know, the GAF or the guy, but it talks about the need, like invention,
exactly.
You know, the country, as a country, you know, we could have more people like him develop more things, you know, creative things that the country could rely on. And that is why he gave examples of powerful countries like Iran, like America. Today they are enjoying because of their inventions. And, you know, they're taking advantage of that, you know, to control the world to some extent. So I think it's quite an important initiative, and in fact he went to the extent of encouraging, calling for the need for youth to be empowered, for them to focus on in tech areas, so that, you know, they could come with more inventions, you know, because this is very important as a country, you know.
And that's the key as well, because that he's demonstrated this, that could motivate others, not necessarily to want to create these robots to fight fire, but in other areas as well.
Indeed.
They could, you know, catalyze, as
Indeed.
it were, start of something.
Your mind is your greatest asset, trust me. If you make good use of it, you can do a lot of things out of it. Maybe you don't even need, at times, you don't need millions, you don't need thousands to start something. All you need is the idea, and trust me, when it is properly communicated, you can easily work it out with people, with the right people. So it's important. It's quite commendable from his side. And obviously, you cannot remove the GAF from the equations. He's a member of the GAF.
There's no denying that. We're just saying that his project, it wasn't a GAF project. It was an individual achievement, and we must be really, congratulations, bravo to Captain Alaji Ndongo. Yes, we've come to the end of our program. Thank you very much, Usman Jatta, for your interjections. They were very insightful, very grateful. And thank you very much as well to Mr. Ibrahim Cham, our sign language interpreter. And thank you very much to the viewers. Until the next time, I am Mahmoud Mouch. Goodbye.